Okay, we are streaming now live on YouTube. All right, so good to go. All right, so good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for making the adjustments to an earlier time for this week. I actually have a meeting later this evening, and I also gathered that there's an APAC gathering for some around 8 o'clock. I take no offense if you need to leave at 8. We'll try to stop by 8:15. And I am I'm excited to continue with you our study of Kabbalat Shabbat, and we analyzed so far, some of the history behind Kabbalat Shabbat, where it comes from, when did Kabbalat Shabbat begin to be recited, and we are in the middle now. And then we started studying the first paragraph of Kabbalat Shabbat, which is Psalm 95, Lechu Neranena, and Lechu Neranena is it's an interesting paragraph, as we've seen so far. It starts out very much talking about singing and the praises of God and calling out to God, and this makes a lot of sense, as we've talked about, in the context of those who instituted Kabbalat Shabbat. Very much saw this as a moment to go out in the fields, like the rabbis we saw in the Gemara, and bring in Shabbat, the way you welcome in a bride to the wedding. And so that's a pretty special thing to be able to see the text, the connection between the text and what the intention was of those who instituted, not the text, but the instituting the saying of these texts. And you have to try to put ourselves in the mindset of what's going on. So let's pull up on the screen now. Here's our source sheet that we've now made use of for the last number of weeks. I'm just going to put that on one side of my screen. I'm going to put the pictures of you guys on the other side of the screen, so I can see people while I talk. So what we saw was, I'm just going to quickly review a little bit of the paragraph with you. Okay. Let us sing joyously to God, raise our voices to the rock of our, and our Redeemer, our Deliverer. Let us come into His presence with thanks, with praise. In song, we will call out to Him, or shout out to Him. Ki kel gadol Hashem umelech gadol al kol Elohim. Because God is great, and He is the King, the great King over all other gods, lowercase g. Asher b'yodo mechkeri aretz. Now, how does that greatness manifest itself? It manifests itself in the sense that in His hands are the depths of the earth, the tohafot harim lo, and to the highest tops of the mountains. They're all gods. Everything in between is gods. Furthermore, Asher lo hayam v'hu asahu. The sea is His, and He made it. He fashioned it. Vayabesha yadav yatsaru. He fashioned the dry land, with His hands. Bo nishtachave v'nichra'a nivracha lifnei os Hashem oseinu. And come and let us bow down to prostrate and bend our knees, and we shall, be bent before God, our Maker. So we've been following basically two approaches. Again, this is still a little bit of Chazar, but I want everyone to just be on the same page so that we can plow forward with a clear understanding of what's happening here. The Radak, Rav David Kimchi, took the approach that this paragraph of Tehillim he took it in a very messianic way. That why are we singing out and calling out and praising to God and noticing the greatness of God from the tops of the mountains to the depths of the earth? Is because God has brought in a time of Mashiach. And that requires such a response. Everybody sees the greatness of God now in a time of Mashiach. And that's why everyone is bowing down. And we all understand that Hashem is Oseinu, that Hashem is our maker. It's so ever present in our life. It's something we should try to feel every single day. But certainly at a time of Mashiach, that is something that would be even more noticed. And that was the Radak's approach. This paragraph is a very messianic era focused paragraph. Now, that could actually fit nicely with why this is placed at the beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat. If Kabbalat Shabbat is about bringing in the Shabbat queen and going out there and greeting, as it were, I think this is really this extra presence of God, that neshama yetera aspect, that extra spiritual sense that we have on Shabbat, which is another way of saying welcoming God more into our lives on Shabbat. Not that it shouldn't be present Monday, Sunday through Friday, but it should be present, but it perhaps is most noticeably present, I think, on Shabbat. I think that's what the Kabbalists and Tzfat certainly were thinking, that when you welcome in the Shabbat queen, it's Me'ein Olam Haba. Shabbat is like Olam Haba. It's a little bit next worldish, and that sort of rings and resonates a little bit of what it'll be in the Bizman of Mashiach. Not that the time of Mashiach exactly is the same as the next world, but there are certainly some overlapping comparisons between the two. So this is the approach of Rav David Kimchi. So we're going to hold on to that. And the other approach that we've been studying is that of Amos Chacham. Again, if you study Dat Mikra on Sefer Tehillim, Amos Chacham is the one who writes the commentary there. And his approach to this is much more focused on, this is something that would have been said by those traveling to Jerusalem for the three festivals, for the Shalosh Regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And why are they singing out? Because they're on their journey to Yerushalayim. And they're noticing the greatness of God, and they're heading up there. And it says, Nikadma fanav b'todah. When they get there, right? When you get there, bring your Todah, bring your Thanksgiving offering there. And you're going to sing out to God. And God is amazing, and He's great, and it's unbelievable. And that's why you're bowing also. Because once you get there, so right now, in the middle of the paragraph, you've arrived at the Beit HaMikdash, and you are bowing in front of God. You even prostrate yourself right away, because you're so overwhelmed and overcome by being in the presence of the Rabboni Shalom that you just fall.
Turn your phone sideways. It'll be bigger.
I did.
What was that? Oh, I think you guys need to put on the mute button.
I have very bad vision.
I'll help you out. You fall flat on your face right off the bat. That's what bo nishtachaveh. That's falling flat on your face, as we spoke about. And then v'nichra'ah is being bent on your knees. Usually you would bend your knees first, and then you'd prostrate completely. But perhaps here you're in such awe of having entered into the presence of God that's why you're prostrating fully first and then bowing. That's how Amos Chacham wanted to explain that particular part. And so what we saw at the end of last week was this next pasuk, was Ki Hashkihu Elokeinu v'anachnu al marito v'tzon yado. He is, so now we kind of zoom in on we're being the Jewish people and this unique relationship that we have with God, and He is our God, and we are His flock. He is v'anachnu al marito v'tzon yado. We are the people that He shepherds, and we are the flock in His hand. We are the sheep. We are the sheep. God tends to us and takes care of us. And this is our relationship. And then the paragraph very much switches tone here in the middle of this pasuk. Hayom im bekolo tishmo. Today, if you listen to the voice, to His voice, im bekolo tishmo, if you listen to His voice and you really heed what He says, right? So as that flock, as the sheep, there, as Amos Chacham points out in his commentary, there are choices that we make. Are we going to be the sheep that follows its shepherd and do the right thing and stay safe, well fed? Or are we going to be the sheep that wanders off? Just because there's a shepherd and there's a sheep doesn't mean the sheep always follows the shepherd. It is questionable whether or not that happens. And so the author here, right, of this Mizmor is telling us, if you listen as sheep, right, if you listen to God, right, or basically how important it is to listen to God. Okay, now that's where we kind of left off last week. I see we have a comment here in the chat box. I'm sorry. If you would only listen, right? If you would only listen, that's probably the proper, Alan, thank you, right? The proper way to read this is, right, because it's kind of, it reads a little bit like a sentence fragment, but if you translate it that way, that's just probably the proper translation, which is, if we would only listen. Now, the story that's about to be brought up, and we made reference to this actually also last week, is the story that happens in the desert when the Jewish people leave Egypt. But let's read a little bit in the Psukim and get some appreciation, and we'll review as well the story. So we're going to flip down, or slide down here in the source sheet to, okay, right over here. We're actually, let's review the story, okay? We didn't look at this inside last week. Shmot chapter 17, Perek Yud Zayin, first 7 psukim. Vayisu kol ha'at bnei Yisrael mimidbar sin l'maseim al pi Hashem vayachanu b'refidim ve'ein mayim lishtot ha'am. So what happened? Not that long ago, there was other. They crossed the sea. Then they had an incident with water. They didn't have water 3 days afterwards, and they got the water. And then they had a problem with the food. They weren't happy with the food situation, and then God gave them man. There's a series of complaints that take place here, and now they're not that far. How do I know they're not that far removed? Because this traveling happens only about, I think, a month after they've left. If you look at the previous psukim, they're not more than at least a few months removed from their exodus from Egypt. They travel here in this verse from the desert, the wilderness of Sin. Okay, they journey according to the way God tells them to go. They camp in Refidim, and lo and behold, another problem. Once again, they don't have water. Vayarev ha'ami Moshe. Now, the well-mannered person doesn't quarrel with a person about water. They would inquire about water. Here, they go right to complaining and fighting with Moshe about it. And they say, give us water so we can drink. Vayomer lehem Moshe, ma tirivuni madi. You're angry at me. You're fighting with me. Hey, you want to ask for water? No one's going to begrudge you for asking for water, but you're fighting with me, right? He's bothered by this word right here, vayarev, that they came to fight with him. They to quarrel with him. And he says, why are you quarreling with me? Why are you're yelling at me? Stop yelling at me. Matin asunat Hashem. Why are you testing God? Right? You're yelling at me, but let me tell you something. Your problem is really with God. You just don't know where to address it to. So you're just yelling at me. But they were thirsty. They didn't hear, Moshe, enough with your talking. I'm still thirsty. Where's the water? Vayolen ha'am al Moshe, and they were grumbling and they were complaining and they were Vayomer lama zehli tanu mimitzrayim lahamitoti. Why did you, Moshe, take us out of the desert? So we could die here in the desert, out of Egypt, so we could die in the desert, Bet Banai, and our children? Why would you want to bring us out here so that our children could die? Vet Miknai Batsama, and who else is going to die? Our sheep are going to die. And we're going to die of thirst. Vayitzak, look at the complaining here. Vayitzak, so they're complaining. Let's note something. Let me ask everybody here. Who do the people credit with taking them out of Egypt in this pasuk that we just read? Who took them out of Egypt according to the people?
Yeah.
Who was that, Alan? Moshe. Yeah. Moshe takes them out of Egypt. According to what they're saying, Moshe takes them out, not God. Now they all know that God. Didn't they see the plagues? Didn't they see the sea split? But yet they start saying Moshe took us out. Why did you take us out to die in the desert? Vayitzak Moshe el Hashem lemor. Moshe cries out to God, what kind of an assignment did you give me? What do I do with these people? They're ridiculous. They're yelling at me for things that I didn't do. Od me'atu skaluni. They're going to stone me in a short time if this keeps going. Vayomer Hashem, God says to Moshe, go in front of the nation. V'kach itcha miziknei Yisrael. Take some of the elders. Take your staff umatcha. Asher hikita bo et hayeor. Kach biyadcha v'halachta. The same staff, the rod that you struck the Nile with, that the plagues, particularly Dam and Svardeya, began with. Take that. That they'll remember that mateh. That's a very special mateh that they'll remember. That was a mateh that brought on plague. Hineni omei lefanecha sham al hatzur v'chorei v'hikita v'atzur v'yatzu mayim v'yatzu menu mayim v'shata ha'am. Right, and he says, I'll be standing there before you at Chorev, which is on the rock at Chorev, which is Har Sinai. I'll be waiting for you there. And what did Moshe do? He hits the rock, right? He hits that rock. The rock brings forth water, and they drink. And of course, probably people are pretty happy, right? Vayas came Moshe le'enei ziknei Yisrael, and the elders saw what Moshe did. Vayikra Shem HaMakom, and what was that place called where this incident took place? Masa u'meriva. The place was named Masa u'meriva. Why was it named Masa u'meriva? The Torah tells us, Al Riv B'nei Yisrael, because of the quarreling of the children of Israel. They quarreled with Moshe. That's fact. They fought with Moshe here. It's always going to be named Masa, and it's also will be named Meriva. Why? V'al nasotam et Hashem leimor. Nasotam, same shorish as Masa. Right, that they tested God there, saying, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayim. We learned something here. They say, what was their problem this whole time? Is God really amongst us, or is he not? It's not that they don't believe in God. They struggle to believe whether God is with them. This is, I believe, the biggest problem that the Jewish people have throughout their time in the desert. They just don't believe that God is with them. They might be believing that he deals with the big things in the world. He deals with plagues and the sea splitting. Come on. He deals with water. He deals with, food issues. He's the guy who deals with hail coming from the sky, which has fire on the inside. That's God. God deals with water problems. They didn't understand that God is there with you all the time. And that's why Moshe, right, they sort of are crediting Moshe, you took us out here to die. That God made the plagues happen, that was God. You were the one who had the plan to take us out. That's not what God would have bothered with. And Moshe's trying to teach them a lesson. You're not having a problem with me, he tells them, right? That's what he was saying. Why are you testing God? Et Hashem. You're testing him. You think God's not here? God is here. And here, this is made very clear at the end of this section, because this place was always named for the fact that they had tested God. And what was the test? Whether or not they could really trust that God was in their midst, or was he really not in their midst? Now, with that understanding of that story, the rest of the paragraph of Tehillim makes a lot more sense. Okay? So let's continue now in the Psukim. This is Pasuk Chet, verse 8. Al takshu livavchem kimeriva, kiyom masa bamidbar. Do not be difficult in your heart. Don't harden your heart as at the time in Merivah when they were fighting with Moshe. Kiyom Masa, like the day of Masa in the wilderness. Clearly a reference to this story. Don't harden your hearts. Don't be stubborn like in those days. The Radak, by the way, simply quotes the verse that we just saw. He says, Shem HaMakom Nikra Masa. The place was called Masa Merivah because of the quarreling that the Jewish people had done with Moshe, and that they tested God, saying, is God in our midst or is he not? And this is important to understand. The Radak doesn't spell this out, but if you are taking a messianic approach to this, what the Radak would say to you, I believe, lefi aniut dati, my humble opinion, is that the reason that this is said here is that, look, Mashiach has come. This is an amazing time of the ultimate redemption. And you know what happened the first time we were redeemed as a people? We messed up, and then we messed up, and then we messed up. We kept messing up because we thought that God was not there with us on a day-to-day basis, that God's presence was not felt. And so this is the challenge of even the time of Mashiach. Can I continuously, Mashiach will be ushered in by some sort of, I imagine, momentous occasion that may, I don't know what it look like. But then what happens the day after? And then the next day? And then the day after that? When we start to have when there's issues of water, no food, what will we do? Well, we start turning back to, turning to others and say, where is the water? Or are we going to turn to God? Are we going to acknowledge finally that God is there in our moments of redemption? Our ancestors I'm not blaming them. They went through a lot, but they struggled to see God in their presence on a day-to-day basis. Now, if you take the approach, that's the Radak approach. If you take the approach of Amos Chacham that we're dealing here with people who are coming to the Beit HaMikdash and they were overjoyed about being in the presence of God. So what are we to do with this sudden shift in the paragraph to, if only the Jewish people would listen, basically, and not make the mistake like we once made back in the desert? What's going on here? It's that the person who comes in front of God is very much like the Jew who left Egypt. You could not have seen God more clearly in this world as those Jews who left Egypt. They saw plagues. They saw a sea split. They went through and the Egyptians did not. They believed, Vayaminu b'Hashem. They believed in Hashem. There was no doubt they believed in God. But they struggled with the day-to-day belief that God was so involved in their life. God is present there. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayin. And so as we come in front of God in the Beit HaMikdash, can we acknowledge the greatness of God and to be very careful in the presence of God and not to take the presence of God lightly like they took it in the desert. They took the presence of God as, God is there, but he's not like, he's not like right here. And when you're in the Beit HaMikdash, you need to have the approach of God is right here. It's the way that he is all the time, but that's particularly a place where the Shekhinah dwells. And therefore, we're not supposed to be stubborn about approaching, about seeing God and experiencing God in this world. Okay, good. Let's continue here. Any questions at any time? Let me just make sure my volume's on. Yeah, you could just feel free to chime in. Oh, somebody commented in the chat box. I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay, Alan just commented a little bit a while ago. The first person saying you're right. Barbara, you commented, is it significant that the elders went and not the youth? Did the elders even go into the land of Israel? So the elders are not the ones the literal elders were not the ones to travel into the land of Israel at the end of the day. The young ones seem to maybe have. Amos Chacham actually talks about this, that anyone under the age of 20 leaving Egypt would have been eligible to enter the land of Israel. It was the generation above the age of 20 when they left, they were the ones who did not enter the land of Israel. Is it significant that the elders went? Yes, I think it is significant. I think that if you can show the leaders of the community, indeed God is here. You see, I hit the rock. Water doesn't come out of rocks if not for God. And I think Moshe was trying to show them, look, you see, God is even concerned about water. He's not just making frogs come out of the Nile and hail falling from the sky and darkness that's unnatural. God is even involved in the water situation. So I think that if the elders see that, people will take their cues from the leadership of the Jewish community.
I found it interesting that the elders were accompanying Moshe to they were right to go along to strike the rock, yet they are not the ones who get to go into the land of Israel. They're wise enough to be there to support Moshe, but they are not able to go into the land. It's just an interesting, it's a thing. I don't know how to explain it, but I noticed it.
Yeah, Alan, well, you wanted to comment on that?
The fact that the elders were not going into Israel, that was a later event.
Correct. That will be because of what happens with the sin of the spies. Correct. But it may be that maybe Moshe wanted to make the point to them because maybe they also, Barbara, were struggling. Maybe those elders were also part of the camp that said, "Is God really there, or is He not there?" And maybe He wants to make the point to them specifically because they are seen as leaders, and maybe they're struggling too.
But not only that even though they're struggling, and even though they were not permitted to enter the land, they were valuable enough. They had quite a bit of wisdom and value prior to that. And I thought that was noteworthy.
Yeah. Yes. Very good. Okay. So, fine. Now, one more point. Amos Chacham claims that this phrase, that the idea of Masa Meriva, right? Masa Kiyom Masa Bamidbar. I mean, Masa was one occurrence. That place, Masa Meriva. And yes, it's true. It was in the desert. But he sees this reference of Masa Meriva and this question of is God amongst us or not as the question that essentially defines the Jewish challenge in the desert. He says that this is that this test went on for the whole time. That they struggled to really know if God was present with them on a day-to-day basis. By the way, there's a real proof to that, I think, in the actual text of the Torah. When God, after the sin of the golden calf, what was the punishment? After Moshe talks him out of destroying the Jewish people, what was the punishment going to be? Anyone remember? What would God say He's not going to do anymore? Well, so let me fill you in. What He tells them is, I'm not going to be in your midst. And this causes a great avelut, a great sense of mourning to go up in the Jewish camp. And Moshe basically says, God, come on, you got to go with these people. Be with them. What does that even mean? And the answer is they wanted God to be present with them, right? And when God threatened that He's not going to be there anymore, in a very, amongst their camp, that was very distraught. They were very distraught. But I think that they really struggled with that, whether or not they felt God in that way. And that's, I think, what Amos Chacham is saying. And that was the 40-year challenge for the Jewish people. Now, what happened then? The parak in Tehillim continues, Asher nisuni avotechem, bechanuni gam ra'ufa ali. That when your ancestors put me down, notice, by the way, there's a switch here. There's a switch to now this is God's voice. That the writer, the author here, David HaMelech, or one of the others who helped in putting together Tehillim here, switches to first person, as it were, that God is speaking. Now, what happened? When your ancestors tested me, right? They put me to the test. Even though they had seen what I had done, they saw what I did for them. They knew exactly how incredible God was and what God could do, the capabilities of God. They saw it firsthand, and yet they still tested me. The Radak writes here, how many times they tested me? I split the sea for them. Didn't they see every day there was this heavenly food falling from the sky? I mean, they didn't see it falling. It was there in the morning. Come on. And then And then the water, cracks and then the water comes out of a rock. They still tested me. They just couldn't believe, am I there or am I not there? Despite all the miracles. Right? And by the way, the man was a daily miracle. The sea, okay, that was a one-time amazing, but the man was every morning except for Shabbat. Perush, gam ki afilu achar shira'u pa'ali kodem hanisim, afal pikein lo ha'aminu bi v'nisuni. Right? Even after they had seen the miracles that I had done, even so, they didn't believe in me. They didn't believe that I was there for them, and they tested me. This is again just waxing poetic on the challenge that the Dor Hamidbar had, that the generation who lived in the desert. This was their big struggle that they had. I'm just taking a look here if Amos Chacham had an interesting comment I wanted to share here. I think we're good here. I think we're good here. He just brings up some of the stories in the desert about where they really struggled here. He just writes here, by the way, that Ra'ufa Ali. So this actually one comment he makes here. See this last phrase here, Gam Ra'ufa Ali. That remember, Amos Chacham is working with the framework here that these are people who are coming to Yerushalayim, to the Beit HaMikdash for the regalim, the Ole Regel. So they were. He writes here. You don't see this on your screen, but I'll just read it and I'll translate. He says, "Uvelashon Ra'ufa Ali," with this language of "and they saw my deeds." Yesh remez lekahal hachogagim ha'omdim b'mikdash. This really is a message to those who are gathering together on the holiday to celebrate, right, in the Beit HaMikdash, who are coming to celebrate. V'ro'im et pnei Hashem, and they're supposed to see the face of God. They're coming into contact with the Shekhinah by coming to the Beit HaMikdash. Right, there's a mitzvah to be seen on the Shalosh Regalim. There is actually an interesting version in a midrash that I think is a midrash that also it's us coming to see the face of God, but that makes God sound very much like he has a face, and then so there's some discomfort with that. But perhaps the idea is that we're supposed to see each other in that sense. That those people who are now coming and seeing God, as it were, not actually seeing, but they're coming in the presence of God, need to be careful to not act as their ancestors at Shira'u et Poal Hashem, who saw the acts of God. And even so, they seemed to just try God and not really understand how ever present God is in that moment. So it could be that's a remez here, that's a hint, as he's saying, to those who would have been experiencing God in the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, let's go on to the next pasuk. This is pasuk Yud. Arba'in, and the story continues here. Oh, someone just wrote in the chat box. Let me see what that's written. Okay, Alan asked me a question about Achirek under the Lamed and not at Sebre. Okay, Alan, afterwards we'll talk a little bit of the grammar about this. Excellent question. Okay, so source 24 here, pasuk Yud. Arba'im shana akut bedor. Again, God is the one speaking here. It's in from the perspective of God. 40 years. Arba'im shana akut bedor. I was provoked by that generation. V'omar, and I said, Am toei levavheim.
Our bedroom, and we were doing.
Oh, so a comment here? Okay. Am toei levavheim. They are a people of errors, essentially. Toei levav. They are, they make a lot of mistakes. They're just, what do they translate over here? Senseless people. Okay. They don't get it. They're making they don't get it in their kishkes and their neshama. They're not getting this. V'heim lo yad'u derachai. They do not know my ways. They think they understood. They saw me. They make all these amazing miracles happen, but they don't understand my ways. I'm there more than they think I am. Look what the Radak writes here in his various comments. He writes, Arba'im Shana, this idea, Shehich Isuni bidvar hamiraglim ad shamarti shiyu mitachrim bamidbar Arba'im Shana. They angered me so much with what happened with the spies. That was it wasn't the only thing, but it's definitely the straw that broke the camel's back, or the bundle of straw that broke the camel's back. And until he got to the point, you were provoking me, until I had to say, you can't go into Israel. I'm going to keep you here for 40 years. It's too much. It's too much. You don't get me. Uperush akut. What is the idea of, that they were, I was provoked, God says. Min ra'iti bogdim it koteta. Inyan kitata. What's going on here? Akot comes from the word kitata, the Radak claims, which is talking about fighting or quarreling. So they were basically quarreling with me. When they quarreled with Moshe, they were really fighting with me. Maybe they didn't see that. That was their biggest problem, right? They should have been directing their complaints to God. If they had done that, maybe this would have all ended differently. But they were complaining to Moshe. Upiresh Bador, this idea about this generation provoked God. Bador Hamidbar Amar. Okay, we're talking about the generation of the desert. In the desert. Am toele vavhem amar shetoele vavhem velibam limera velo ya'aminu bi. Their hearts are erring, and they're just their hearts are going. They're deceiving them and causing them to make mistakes here, and that's why they don't believe in me. They don't believe. They lo ya'aminu bi. Not they don't believe in God. They don't believe that God's with them. What is this? They don't know my ways. They don't recognize all the miracles that I did for them. And here they are. They're terrified to go into the land. That's referring to the story of the spies. They were terrified to go into the land of Israel. They didn't trust in me that I could do this. I split the sea for them. I took you out of Egypt. And you think you can't enter the land of Israel safely and be able to overpower those Canaanite nations? Al-Kain nishbati, therefore I swear shelo yavo isham. You're not going to Israel. Umeitu, Shpaisef should say Bamidbar. Umeitu Bamidbar mibein esrim shana v'mala. From 20 years and up, anyone who was there at that time, they died. By the way, it was fascinating, as though that would mean that there were people who left Egypt. I never thought about this until this comment that the Radak wrote. That there were people who left Egypt and who went to the land of Israel. Right? If you were a kid when you left Egypt, and you lived through the 40 years, then you entered the land of Israel, and it may actually help. Side point, may actually help us understand certain things that were said in the book of Dvarim, which would have made more sense to a people who would have seen the Exodus out of Egypt. And I'm like, maybe that makes sense. There were some people who left Egypt, according to this interpretation, who entered the land of Israel. So just file that away one day when we're back in Sefer Dvarim, and you'll think about that. I'll think about it too when we get there. Okay, so here, I think we're good on this one. Okay, I'm just looking here, making sure I covered everything I wanted to cover on this pasuk. Okay, yeah, we're good. The Amos Chacham really reiterates some of the points that we've made to this point. The only thing he adds, I think, that's interesting is that, here it's talking about 40 years as opposed to here it was talking about a few verses earlier, it was talking about a particular day. This wasn't just one day. That was the day that we learned what the problem was, but that problem lasted for 40 years.
Is there a parallel between Eretz Yisrael and Shabbat?
Yes, we're at the last pasuk. So this is exactly, Alan, you're already leading into what I wanted to get to. Excellent. So we're up to the last pasuk of this paragraph of Tehillim. Asher nishbati ve'api im yevaun el menuchati. Right? In my anger about them, about that generation, in my anger I swore, im yevaun el menuchati, they'll never come to the land of my resting place. Now, on a pshat level, what are we talking about? The land of Israel. And that's made clear here by the Radak. He writes, Asher ba'avur zeh katzafti aleihem. Because of what happened in the desert, God was angry and he swore You're not going to come to the place, my resting place, which is V'hi Eretz Yisrael. That's the land of Israel. Shenemar aleha el hamenucha ve'el hanachala kisham nachu Yisrael. Okay, it quotes a verse. I don't even know where this is from, actually, in Tanakh. If anybody knows, please feel free to speak up. To the place of menucha and the place of inheritance, that's where Hisham Nachu Yisrael, that's where the Jewish people will rest. Nachu, they'll dwell there and they'll rest there. That's where they're going to settle. The Amar Menuchati, this idea of my resting place, Kalomar HaMenucha Shenatati Lahem, the rest that I will, that I gave them, right? I gave them this place to feel like they are home, that they are in their resting place. Uperush, this idea, the way it's written is again, if you translate it literally, if I bring them to the place of my rest. It's kind of a sentence fragment. So im here works again with derech shvuah, as common when you have a language of an oath. This will be what happens if such and such. If is a very much a language of an oath. That's why it looks to us like a sentence fragment, but is very common for the language of an oath. So okay. The Amos Chacham writes on this verse. One of the comments that he makes on this verse is that for those who would have been, according to his interpretation, standing in the Beit HaMikdash right now in front in the presence of God, and they were praying there. Atem zachitem lavo el menuchati. The message here for them is, you have arrived and you merited to arrive here in the place of my resting place, Beit HaMikdash. This is the resting place, menuchato shel Hashem. Zichru et avotechem shelo zachu. Remember that your ancestors did not merit this. They never merited to come to the land of Israel. They never merited to come to the Mikdash. They didn't get this opportunity that you are getting today. Why? Why didn't they? Mishum shehichisu et Hashem. Because they angered God. V'hizaharu shelo ta'asu kamotam. Don't do what they did. Don't do what they did. V'od menuchati, and this idea of menuchati, of my resting place, hu hefech shel api. It's the opposite of my anger. What did they experience throughout the desert? Oftentimes, unfortunately, because of their actions, they experienced the wrath and the anger of God. Shebatzela hakodemet, right? That we saw the anger that was mentioned at the beginning of that phrase of the pasuk, right? The api, they never got to experience menuchati, the true menuchati. Kol yemei shel hador hahu haya af Hashem alehem v'lo zachu sheyanuach apo. They couldn't get him to sort of calm his anger down because their actions kept adding up, and unfortunately, it added up to what we know it did, which was an unfortunate situation. Sorry, someone I think was just trying to jump in with a
Rabbi,
comment.
how does this Musar at the end of the section tie in with the the joy that we have in the beginning?
Right. So there's definitely two different sections here. And I think that the joy that is being experienced here is being well, look, with overwhelming situations of joy. The Torah, even Moshe says this in Sefer Dvarim. What will happen when life gets so good? What does he warn the people? What is the big warning that he has for them when things will be good and you'll be doing great in the land of Israel? What does he warn them?
Get God.
Don't forget God. Exactly now. Don't forget God. Don't forget how you got these amazing rewards, that you are succeeding because God is a part of the picture. And so maybe, whether you take Amos Chacham's approach, that you have been now you have merited to come in front of God, or you take the approach of the Radak that we were talking about, a messianic time, the message to that person is, don't mess it up like our ancestors did. They understood full well, like you're understanding right now, whether it's Mashiach or whether it's in the Beit HaMikdash, because you're coming for the Shalosh Regalim, you are experiencing a certain closeness with God right now. Don't mess it up. Look how quickly they went from seeing God at the sea, and they said, "Vayaminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe abdo." We believe wholeheartedly that in God, and how quickly they were struggling to see God in their day-to-day life. And I think that is the message that is coming forth from this Mizmor. Now, so excellent question, Bob. Now I want to finish tonight. I want to just think about this one more time in the context of Kabbalat Shabbat. Why would Moshe Cordovero, who is credited with having, started saying Lechu Neranena, not the other paragraphs, by the way, but Lechu Neranena seems to be credited to him as something that he started to say, Psalm 95. Why does this ending make a lot of sense? Alan, you alluded to this before. What is that? My arrow is pointing to the word here, and that's the word menuchati. What was that? Sorry? I thought I heard somebody chime in there. But menuchati, this idea of menucha, of rest, that we are experiencing on Shabbat, menuchati, not just because we can sleep a little more, but it's this idea of being in a state where we're in God's resting place. We are in a place, Shabbat is a place where as a time, I should say, where we can experience God in some extra way than we can on Thursday or Friday in the afternoon. But it's that neshama yetera aspect of that I can't explain fully what it means to have an extra soul for Shabbat. Except that it's not literal as much as it's metaphorical, in that we have this extra heightened sense of spirituality on Shabbat. That God is that much more present on Shabbat, or at least maybe it's easier to access and tap into that spirituality on Shabbat. And what I think that they would tell you, and I'm putting words in the mouths of the Kabbalists, and I'm really not a Kabbalist at all, so I really shouldn't be doing this, but I'll do it anyways, is that the bringing in of Shabbat, that moment, perhaps they were trying to say, don't mess up. You have a chance to feel this extra special connection right now with God on Shabbat. And we cease to do the things that we do during the weekdays. And we go out to greet that experience, to greet God, the Shabbat queen, and say, I'm here to spend some time with you in a time of minucha. And I don't want to mess up like our ancestors did, who missed the opportunity of the closeness of God, of experiencing and feeling it on a day-to-day basis. That we don't want to experience Hayesh Hashem Bikir Beinu Imayim. We want to feel God and not make the mistake of the generation of the desert and provoke God and ignore that Shabbat is something particularly special when we can really connect with God. And I think that's the purpose for this paragraph being the kickoff to Kabbalat Shabbat. This is why Moshe Cordovero, in my opinion, he'll tell you maybe differently. Bisman HaMashiach will tell us differently. But this I think is a pshat that makes sense, whether or not it's actually the truth of why they chose this one. But you have this idea of singing out at the beginning, of very much the sphere of the Gemara that we saw of singing to bring in Shabbat and welcoming the bride, and wedding is festive and joyous and like that. But you also don't want to get caught up in all the happiness and the simcha and miss the moment of connecting with God, and and just get caught up in whatever can distract us on Shabbat, like our ancestors got distracted from really focusing in on the fact that God was truly there all the time. It's 8:23. I'm going to stop the screen share. We'll continue next time with the next Psalm, Psalm 96, which is the next paragraph in Kabbalat Shabbat, which is also very fascinating. Shiru LaHashem, Shir Chadash, this idea of sing out to Hashem a new song. And we'll try to again explain the pshat, the simple understanding of that, of the text of Psalm 96, and then try to think about why is it that the Kabbalists in Sfat would have said, this is, you know what, let's say this one too. It's obviously a series of Mizmorim, of Psalms. Why continue with Psalm 96 in our preparations or in our bringing in of Shabbat on Friday night? Any questions, comments, ideas?
Eshkoch.
Okay, fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. It was very good. Enjoyed